Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. In this episode, we're talking to Chris Chimes. Chris is with Carnival Cruise Lines. This is a great episode. He's going to share some of his insights from working in the travel and tourism business and why he thinks that PR people should not be storytellers. This is going to be an interesting episode. You'll be glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started.
Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd, and I'm joined today by Chris Chimes. Chris is the Chief Communications Officer for Carnival Cruise Lines, the most popular cruise operator in the world. What a great introduction. Chris, welcome to the show. Glad you're here.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
We're glad you're here too, and very excited about our conversation today. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself briefly to our audience?
I am venturing onto my third anniversary with Carnival Cruise Line. I joined in February of 2018 as the Chief Communications Officer. I've spent about 35 years in public relations, starting in politics, but mostly in the travel and technology sector. So I feel like I certainly don't know it all, but I feel like I've seen it all and sometimes experienced it all.
Well, I'm very impressed, Chris, as we're starting to get to know each other a little bit, that you have worked at American Airlines, U.S. Airways, Orbitz, and other great companies. So congratulations on your success having executive roles with those organizations and really being an important influencer in the travel and tourism corporate communication space.
I feel like I've been lucky in that I've worked for a number of big brands that both consumers and in the media know. And I often tell young people as they're looking to start their career, you want to find a great opportunity, but you also want to find a brand or an organization that people know, because it just makes it so much easier to explain what you've been doing as you look for the next opportunity versus working for Acme Inc. To be able to kind of attach yourself to a well-known brand and a highly regarded brand, because people know that smart companies hire smart people.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And, I've also mentored, rising stars or students. And I've also said, if you're not really sure what you want to specialize in and you're a little hesitant to, take a job where all you're doing is social media or all you're doing is writing for a newsletter or some specialty, maybe that's when you spend some time at a smaller company where you're going to have to do everything and start to, kind of find your niche. So that's the one thing I've prefaced that similar recommendation you're sharing with, that if you're not sure what you want to keep doing, then, maybe you need to land somewhere where you're going to be able to spread your wings across multiple experiences.
Exactly. Being a specialist nowadays is probably not the best way to manage your career, because you got to zig and zag and be adaptable. When I started my career, nobody wanted to do employee communications, and now that is the place to be. That's where companies are investing, and as they work to build their culture and build their success from inside out, employee communications just plays such a big part of that, which, like I said, 30 years ago was not where you wanted to be.
Yeah. It's not where I wanted to be either. So Chris, let's a couple warm-up questions. Walk me through your typical day. Do you have a routine, and what does that look like?
Well, right now I'm living in Texas at home. I usually commute to Florida every week where Carnival's headquartered, but I haven't been doing that obviously since last April. Carnival has not been operating with any guests since last March of 2020. And so the day starts early. I've kind of disciplined myself to start with a 6 a.m. walk, because I know that nobody can bother me at 6 a.m., but at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the day might have unraveled. So I start with an early morning walk to kind of clear my head and get ready for the day. I actually use that to make phone calls as well, because people are at work early in the morning on Eastern time. And then the day starts pretty quickly. I typically have multiple check-ins with my team, and they're all still working from home. We have a flexible work schedule right now, so the office is open, but most people are working from home. And then during the course of the day, there are multiple, like so many of us, multiple video calls and meetings. But overall, we're trying to, one, keep our guests informed and keep them enthused about the business, knowing that we don't know when we're going to cruise again. And then just as importantly, keeping our employees informed and enthusiastic, because there's still a lot of uncertainty about when we're going to get back on the water. So the day can take a number of turns with a full plate, but we're very busy. You'd never think with no operations we wouldn't be so busy, but we're extremely busy.
That's fascinating that you find yourself extremely busy, even though, as you said, no ships are sailing with guests on them, for sure. As I think about what you just described, right? You've got you want to keep customer engagement, you want to keep employee engagement. Meanwhile, there's a lot of fatigue in the marketplace. I, for one, would love to be able to go on a cruise right now, but you can't, and in some cases, there's good reason for that. But you're making me think of a recent episode we did with Ken Jacobs, and I'm not sure if you know him, but he's very experienced in the PR industry, or very well connected, and he's a coach in the PR industry. And I found his topics to be very encouraging, and you're reminding me of that episode. If you and our audience would like to check that out, I highly recommend it. Talk to me for a minute, Chris. What is your biggest professional achievement? What are you most proud of in your career so far?
Well, certainly this past year has been the most challenging in my career. I've worked through a number of crises and situations, 9/11 and airline accidents and labor strikes and all kinds of things like that. But no one could have imagined what this global pandemic has been like. I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish as a team and as a company, and maintaining a strong level of support from our guests and our employees throughout this pause. So that's certainly a highlight. Up until this past year, I've always said that my work on the restructuring of U.S. Airways back in right after 9/11, I joined U.S. Airways as a part of a new management team that really we were brought in to execute a restructuring. We ended up filing for bankruptcy 2 different times, and then eventually merging with America West Airlines. But we started that process with most of Wall Street saying, this company will be liquidated by the end of the year. There's no reason for U.S. Airways to exist. And while we had to do some really tough things and terminate pensions and lay some people off and things that nobody wants to do, we ended up preserving 30,000 plus jobs. And eventually, as U.S. Airways merged with America West, and then took on the U.S. Airways name, and then eventually merged with American Airlines, that small nugget of what was then U.S. Airways morphed into the biggest airline in the world. And a lot of people's jobs were preserved in the process. And again, we took that on thinking no one could get it done. And so as a management team and as a communicator, I'm very proud of that as well.
Sounds like it. I mean, that is an accomplishment for sure. And certainly you've seen some turmoil in the world as you've navigated the waters of corporate communications. So I'm really pleased to have you here on the show, and glad you're sharing that. So before we hit the record button, you and I were talking a little bit, and I'm certainly intrigued and want to share more with our audience. But you were saying how, and I don't want to misquote you, but maybe when communicators talk about storytelling, it might be a little bit of your pet peeve, because you think that good storytelling or good PR is about building and having conversations. Talk to us a little bit about that, and let's set it up by explaining why it irks you when people say focus on storytelling, Chris.
Well, I know I'm an outlier on this, so I tread carefully. It's become kind of a hot way of talking about public relations. And I get the importance of being able to tell a story effectively. And I am very grounded in great writing is the key for public relations, because again, you're able to articulate a story. But I'm also a student, going back to years ago. I was a student of Jim and Lori Grunick at the University of Maryland, and they had developed these four models of public relations, where the prize was an effective two-way communications model, where you were in constant conversation with your stakeholders and adapting the organization to the interests of the stakeholders, and being able to solve problems and meet the needs of stakeholders. And so I believe that great public relations is a conversation, not a one-way story. And I also kind of joke too, I'm old enough where we used to call people who were storytellers were kind of liars. There was always a great storyteller at a party, but they also didn't pay a lot of attention to what other people had to say, and they were busy telling stories. So I just want us to be grounded in the fact that storytelling is certainly important as part of what public relations does effectively, but we're ultimately more than storytellers. We're conversationalists, and we are listening, hopefully as much as we are telling stories.
Chris, I absolutely agree with you, and I think you're right. I'm old enough to remember someone being called a storyteller was not a compliment, and I think I can't imagine any great relationship comes from a one-way conversation, right? It's not there. It's no longer our one-way storytelling, if you will, or one-way conversation, because it's not a relationship at that point. In fact, I was on a webinar on Tuesday, and I don't remember the individual's name, so I hate to not give credit where credit is due, but he said, it's about time we put the public back into public relations. And his comment was, for decades, media relations has been the focus of public relations. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that he's exactly right. And I've always said, when people talk about, man, I bet social media has just completely changed the PR industry, I've said, no, actually, it's just another tool in the toolbox of a talented communicator. Great PR people have always been able to reach their audience directly and use the tools that they had. Social media just gives you a bigger platform and more instantaneous ability to communicate with those folks.
Exactly. I think the pitfall of social media, though, also is everybody can see when you fail.
Yeah.
Everybody can see that post only got 1,400 likes, or a video didn't get very many views. Right. And that was never out there before. So there's a lot more pressure on communicators to make sure they're delivering messages and content that people are engaging with.
Last year, I was at a conference, and we were having a little sidebar conversation, and it was, not people in our industry, just PR professional, but it was like an industry conference. And somebody said to me, and Chris, and this, a little light bulb went off, and I thought it was great. He said to me, the problem is, like, old school people like me, we know what PR is. He said, but it seems like the new generation, when they talk about PR, they call it thought leadership, and they call it content marketing. And I was like, you are exactly right. That's what, there's this big confusion now. I mean, people have always been confused what PR is. I've had many business leaders say, I don't know what PR is, but I know our company needs it. And now it seems like the trendier term is to call it thought leadership or content marketing. Those aren't new terms, but it just seems like, when we're talking to clients or companies, they're saying, well, we need thought leadership, not PR. We need content, but not PR. And I'm like, well, that's just what people are calling it now.
I was listening to your podcast, I think from last week, about measurement, which again, I think is very important. But at the end of the day, we're not a science. And while it's important for us to be able to demonstrate our effectiveness for an organization or for a client, a lot of our value is based on being smart and offering good advice and being quick and responsive and solving problems. And so if we tilt too much towards just focusing on the numbers, I'm not sure that is putting our best foot forward with regard to what we're really valuable for and why why we need to be in the C-suite and why we need to be at the table. It goes beyond just showing the effectiveness of the numbers, but being smart about the business, being able to talk about the business, and being able to help the business or the organization succeed. And it's not always based on evaluations.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So, I can go from one guest to another where one feels very strongly about measurement and others feel like, that measurement may not be, exactly what the company should focus on versus, other measures and KPIs. And so, yeah, it's interesting. It's the same thing as, I feel like if you have a technician or an expert come over to your house and look at a project, a home improvement project, they might say, well, they did this, this, and this, and I wouldn't have done it that way. And it's like, yeah, but I bet that guy could come into one of your projects and go, I would have done this way too. And the same thing is true for public relations and corporate communications. So,
right. I mean, my wife and I have redone 4 houses, and there's a steady stream of contractors we brought through over the years, and no contractor ever agrees that what the guy before him did was the right way to do it. Right. So, I mean, again, I think that measurement is very important because you want to be able to watch the effectiveness, but I think it needs to be a balance along with the other kind of immeasurable things that you can bring to the table. And certainly having the trust of a CEO is very important, and that has to go beyond the numbers.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, we have to take a quick break here, but I'm going to come back with a really good question to ask you. So stand by.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Okay, welcome back to On Top of PR. We are joined by Chris Chimes and having a really good conversation. Before we get back into it, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, ReviewMaxer, and their support of On Top of PR. By the way, if you go to reviewmaxer.com/ontopofpr, they have a special offer for our fans. So please check that out. Thank you, ReviewMaxer, for your sponsorship. If you're enjoying this episode, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Maybe even share this episode with one of your colleagues. We would appreciate it, and so would they. And now let's get back to the show. Chris, thank you for being on the show again. We were just talking about craftsmanship and how a good craftsman has their own unique opinions. So let me ask you this. If you were to leave your position today, what advice would you give to your successor and why?
I would make sure that they understand the business, that they find some people within the organization who are going to be mentors about the business, especially if, like me, if they're brand new to an industry. Understanding the business is critical. Second, again, this is sometimes style, but I have tended to come in rather quietly and observe quite a while before I open my mouth and offer suggestions. I think that's the best way to build trust with the team you're managing. Mm-hmm. They don't want to hear what you used to do at the last company or wherever you were before. They want to be asked their opinions. And so I think that that's very important as far as the transition as well.
Cool. And so I think that's good advice. Again, I think some of that has to do with just personal preference. Like you said, some people come in and they don't want to be quiet. They want to be, a bull in the china shop, or they were hired to be a reformer and make big changes. And then you're right. I think it's good to kind of yield and learn and listen. I've learned more by listening, obviously, in my career. And, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes you fail publicly, and certainly those are times where you also learn. So going back to the question, let's say, for whatever reason, somebody succeeded you in your position, you got promoted, et cetera. What do you think that person coming in with a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective, what do you think they might do differently than what you and your team are doing today?
I heard an interesting keynote speaker a couple of years ago, and his whole thing was every organization, and certainly communications leaders, should kind of have an act like a 5-year-old day, maybe once a year, right? And
Right.
ask why. Think about, when my kids are grown, but think about those conversations. Why? And not to be afraid of asking why, or not be afraid of people who ask why.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think it's fair for anybody, again, as they're coming into an organization or into a new role, as part of their learning process, they should be asking why, not in an accusatory way, and people shouldn't view it as in a defensive way. But the why is ultimately what we're all about. I just spent time with my team yesterday as we were trying to work on a project and roll something out, and I said, we're missing the why. I don't understand the why. And that's again what we're trying to do here. Why does somebody want to buy this? Why does someone want to come work here? Why does somebody want to invest in this company? And so the why is a natural question for communicators, and we should be willing to ask it, and we should be encouraging people to ask it, because that just makes us better in developing our story. I'm using that storyteller analogy that I said I didn't like, but developing the messaging and developing the story, ultimately, it's much more impactful when you can answer the why.
Chris, I can't agree more. In fact, I'm a big fan of asking why. I think root cause analysis tells you have to ask why 7 times to get to the true issue at hand. And I've also read that the best strategist, or to be perceived as being a strategist, is just to come in and ask questions. So, a trusted advisor is one who just asks questions, and through their question probing, people are able to reflect a little bit and have introspection. And ultimately, what I've heard and what I've experienced is the more questions you ask that are thoughtful, the more people like and trust you, and they think you're just brilliant, even though all you did was ask questions.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, my team knows that the worst thing I could say when I've reviewed something is like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
It's like, make this more, I'm bored. I couldn't even finish reading this.
Right.
Try again. But again, give me the why. Why should I care? And I'll keep going.
Absolutely. I'm the same. In fact, I think twice this week I've told someone I got bored and stopped reading this at this point here. So figure out a way to make it more interesting before you send it back to me, and certainly before we share it with anybody else. So
Right.
Okay, so we know we're in the midst of, we're recording this just for our audience in early February. I'm sure this will air several weeks later, but this is where we are today in the world. And I like to ask many of our guests, the idea of kind of, hey, it's 3 years from today, Chris, and we're talking, we're going out for dinner, and you're super happy with your progress in the last 3 years. What has happened in those 3 years to make you so happy? But obviously, we're at a very interesting starting point, right, of where you are and your company is right now. But go ahead, kind of give us some insight into, where you sense the industry is going to be, your company is going to be, and where you would like to be, both, professionally and in leading your organization 3 years from now.
I hope that I will never be using the word unprecedented again. Obviously, as a company with Carnival Cruise Line, I hope that all of our ships are back on the water, full, our guests are happy, no one's wearing a mask, all those things that are still going to be part of society for a while. We're going to see those on our ships as well. And then finally, we were a successful, profitable cruise line before this started, and I would expect us to be again at the top of the list with regard to being successful, profitable, and popular with our guests. So when people ask me about my transition into the cruise industry, I've said I have never worked in a sector where your guests or your customers and your employees are equally and highly loyal to the organization. That is a great place to start. Those are attributes you can't go out and create unless you've invested in those for years and years and years. And so that loyalty is going to pull us through this. And so I want to be proven correct in that regard with regard to how I view how we're going to manage our success.
That's a great answer, Chris. I really like that, and I look forward to seeing that happen too. So that it's not only good, obviously, for your company, but it's going to be good for us and our nation to have the freedom to travel and do the things that we really enjoy doing and creating memories, which is so important. And certainly, that's an important part of what your company offers.
Yeah, I was on a call last week with some travel industry executives, and I said, look, we need to define back to normal and psychologically as people traveling again, right? I mean, I think, we all want to go out to dinner. We all want to do the little things, but, when will we feel like life is back to normal? It's when we see crowds at Disney World and people on cruise ships and arenas full and Broadway theaters full. That's when we're going to psychologically feel like it's back to normal, and hopefully that'll happen. But for the travel industry, at least, I think that's for us to help define.
So, Chris, as we're starting to run out of time quickly, I know we could keep talking for a long time. I do want to ask you, you mentioned some of the things you're working on right now, but what are you working on right now that has you really excited?
Well, we are continuing to plan our return to operations. So that has me excited because we want to get back to business. But the company's been spending a lot of time during this pause really digging in on diversity and the like. And by nature, we are a very diverse and inclusive organization in that we have employees from almost 120 countries around the world. So we're used to working with people from different cultures, and consequently that spills over into our guests. And so I think we have a system in which everybody feels welcome, but I think we also can't take that for granted. And so as we continue to build out our diversity and inclusion practices and the like, that's got a lot of people excited, because I think that we can bring that to life in different ways, and we're dedicated to doing that.
I can see why that's exciting times. So good for you. I'm glad to hear that. Chris, before we end, I have to ask, I think our audience is very curious. So your commute from Texas to Florida, what does that look like? How do you pull that off?
I have typically flown in Sunday night into Florida, just because if I try to do it on Monday morning,
everything can go wrong.
The days shot by the time I get to the office. So
right.
I have an apartment near the office in Doral, Florida. I get in Sunday night, I get organized for the week, and I hit the ground running, and then typically try to get back either Thursday night and work from home on Friday, or sometimes Friday. It really just depends. I've been in the airline business for years, and so we travel a lot, and so that part doesn't really phase me that much. Sometimes being on a plane gives me 3 or 4 hours of quiet time to read a book or watch a movie or even just get caught up on emails. So, it's a little easier. My kids are grown, so I don't have that pressure as much with regard to kind of being away. But certainly this has been great, not having to commute these past 10 months. I wish it wasn't for the circumstances it is.
Sure.
But people have to do what they have to do. At one point I had a job where I was driving my daughter to school and going from Virginia, where we lived, up to Maryland and then downtown Washington for my job. And I was driving about 2 hours every morning. So, a 3-hour plane ride twice a week ain't that bad. So.
Yeah, my friend Sean, he commutes from Florida to Boston in a very similar way. And he gets 1 week a month before the pandemic where he would work from home, and he hasn't been back to Boston in quite some time. So yeah, I can relate to that. And certainly there's a lot of people who, do this every week, sometimes to a completely different city as part of their job. So it's not that unusual, but I just wondered how you pulled it off. So
yeah, no, it could be a challenge if you wanted to make it one, but look, people have worse commutes, or they could be on the road to a different city every week,
that's right.
in marketing or sales. So you do what you have to do and you make it work, and you have the commitment of your family to make it work, and it does.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Well, Chris, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you. If our audience wants to reach out to you and get to know you or connect with you, what's your preferred way for them to reach you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I also just started as the new co-host of a podcast dedicated to the aviation business called Airlines Confidential. So people are finding me off that website as well.
Okay.
But I'm not hiding, so I can be found.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Chris, any closing word of wisdom before we wrap up?
Other than the fact that for those of you who have chosen a career in public relations, it really is a privilege to be able to sit in the middle of your organization and be responsible for its reputation and for its success in multiple ways. And so cherish that, invest in that, and make sure that you continue to kind of manage your own career, knowing that there are lots of opportunities, but you got to dig in, and you got to pay attention to what's going on around you, because this industry moves very quickly, and our jobs are often the focus of a change. When there's a change in management, sometimes the PR folks get changed too, and you shouldn't take that personally, but all the more reason to make sure you understand how important it is to communicate effectively and support your colleagues.
That's great words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing, Chris. This has been another great episode of On Top of PR. Chris, it's been a pleasure to have you here. We're glad you joined us, and look forward to staying in touch with you. And again, I wish you much success, and looking forward to getting cruising again, my friend.
Exactly. We want to see everybody on board as soon as possible.
That sounds great. We'll do just that. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jason.
Well, that's another episode of On Top of PR. It's a pleasure having Chris Chimes on the show with us. And again, many thanks to our sponsor, ReviewMaxer. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like it, share it, and subscribe. We'd love to have your subscription to On Top of PR. New episodes drop every Tuesday.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer.